Welcome back to News in Focus. As I mentioned, of course, before we went on the break, I'm going to be chatting to Malebo Kobe, who is the Member of Parliament for ActionSA. Malebo, good day. Thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Hi, Faraz. Thank you so much for having me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. I mean, Malebo, so you are the youngest Member of Parliament for ActionSA. Is this pressure or is it a position that you relish?
Look, it's both ways. So it's a position that I relish and I really honor this responsibility, but it is a lot of pressure. And given that I haven't had as much and extensive years of political participation like our caucus leader or what most of the older people in parliament, it does give me a lot of pressure. But I mean, it's a responsibility that I take head on, and I'm quite a high achiever, so it's a responsibility that I know that I will do my best to ensure that I perform.
Malebo, we are in the year 2025. As women, and I want to get it from your perspective, of course, I mean, where do you feel women are now in terms of the political spectrum within South Africa?
Much better in terms of political participation and representation. I mean, last week I was at the Pan-African Parliament in Midrand, where we were, representing women, especially young women from Parliament. And I can tell you that across Africa, we haven't moved the needle as much. And as compared to South Africa, where we have done significantly well, I mean, our speaker is a female, our deputy speaker is also a female, and I mean we've got 46% participation and representation of women. I think we're at a pretty good place in terms of political participation, but definitely more must be done.
Yeah, Malebo, you mentioned 46%. That's 46% of female representation within the National Assembly, 36% within the National Council of Provinces. I mean, do you feel this is enough in terms of overall representation, or has female representation exceeded expectations?
No, absolutely not. I mean, more needs to be done, absolutely. And you do see it in terms of how, committees are holding ministers and members of the executive accountable, that sometimes even within their framing of the work that they do, it's not gender sensitive at all or gender responsive. If we had many more female voices, I think we would have a good balance of how legislation should then serve a majority of women and ensure that there is political and economic participation of women at grassroots level, where legislation makes that sort of provision. But because we don't have, I think, enough female voices, we are just moving on without really stopping to say, are we gender sensitive? The increased presence of women will ensure that a lot of the work that we do is responsive and highly gendered, as it should be.
Politics as a field in itself, it's very hostile, it's very demanding, it's very challenging. It's probably one where it takes a lot out of a person mentally and physically. In your view, Malebo, what would you feel is the main challenges facing women who want to enter this field?
So I think it's two ways. I think we have the cost of politics, which is in monetary value. It is extremely expensive to be active in politics. And also, I think in terms of just the opportunity costs, a lot of women cannot afford to take time off and take part in an extensive campaign trail as men are able to do because of the responsibilities that are naturally endowed on us as women. And also, I think because political funding is highly gendered. And I say this because it's much easier for male candidates to get support, financial support, backing, and also to have people on the ground believe in them much more than women do. And what this does is that naturally it just, it by default keeps the system favoring male candidates as opposed to women, even if my policies make much more sense, but we'd never have financial backing in terms of, political funders who are saying, you know what, trust Malebo, and Malebo should then run with the
Sure.
with the policies. So I think in that aspect we can see that the system naturally just disadvantages women. And what ends up happening is that we have repeat incumbents of male who continue to win elections and come back again because they have even leveraged on their positions in parliament or in executive positions to get recognition and more funding to fund their campaigns. So we just have a vicious cycle that
Yes.
continues to favor male incumbents as opposed to female participants.
There's something interesting you mentioned, Malebo, and that is grassroots, understanding politics. Now, when I studied politics at the University of Johannesburg, I'm not going to give the year because I'll be giving my age away. That's a very, very long time. There were very few female representatives within that class over there. And I remember it vividly. And I thought to myself, I mean, it just seems as if maybe either females are not interested in politics, or maybe it's a societal problem that we have in terms of inclusivity of females in understanding politics. I just want to get your view on the point that you made on grassroots. It starts with grassroots, doesn't it? That females need to get involved, or maybe there seems to be a cutoff for them to be understanding or being part of what politics is and the importance of it within our country.
Look, women naturally at grassroots levels, I think most of the issues affect us as women naturally. And so you would expect a natural participation, especially as we go on and we are now invited to tables and positions where we can make decision making, where there's decision making power. But women at those places are particularly, there's a lot of gatekeeping. And as you said, the environment is particularly hostile. And when you speak about being involved in politics at that level, especially in university, there's a lot of sexual harassment that women face particularly, which is very unfortunate. And what that ends up doing is that people who are victimized don't want to continue to move within the system that has traumatized them so badly. Even if they have genuine issues that they are, promulgating within that space. But that environment has proven to be quite hostile to women. And the gatekeeping of women on tables and decision-making structures has absolutely been one of the most, one of the things that disincentivizes women from particularly moving up the ranks and participating from grassroots levels up until parliament. Somewhere along the lines, women fall to the wayside because they get married or they have experienced some sort of sexual abuse or sexual harassment within in their varsity spaces. It's just not an environment that enables female participation to its fullest. It's very rare that you find someone who started from grassroots levels and is able to move from the battleground to the palace or the passages of power in parliament. Very rare.
Malebo, one final question before we go to the break. From a global perspective, we still see a lot of women underrepresented. Maybe in Europe or in the Far East, we are seeing leaders in high positions. I just want to get your take on it. And of course, after the break, we'll come to the South African perspective, why there is still this underrepresentation of women from a global perspective.
Yeah. Also, the global space reminds me a lot that states also have different cultures and different personalities. So it also depends on how states within their internal domestic policies, if they are advancing women or the rights of women or the participation of women. In countries, Middle Eastern countries, you barely see the participation of women. I can tell you this because I've seen a blocking, say that the block of the League of Arab States. They had one female head of mission who was from Tunisia, and the rest were males. And that also comes and speaks to the way in which culturally women have been given space to participate or have been largely marginalized because of religious or cultural beliefs. And that also translates then into their foreign policies and how they find expression within the global community.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Malebo Kobe, discussing women in politics. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to News in Focus. I'm still in conversation with a Member of Parliament from ActionSA, Malebo Kobe. Malebo, again, thank you so much for staying with us. Malebo, let's come home and I mean, as much as we can celebrate and necessarily celebrate, of course, having two speakers of Parliament, a deputy and a speaker being female. When we look at political parties as a whole, I mean, you could only look at, for example, the Good Party, who has, of course, Patricia de Lille as its leader. The rest of it, of course, has male leaders in there. In your view, I mean, what barriers are still in existence to, achieve gender parity in political institutions?
I think, political parties need to be much more intentional in terms of placing female leaders at the helm. And I say this because, but the political party that I'm from, I can tell you now, we are really far, like light years ahead in terms of political representation of women. If you can see our parliamentary caucus, it's made up of 50% men and 50% women, with also me being the youngest. And also, if you look at that kind of makeup, our chief whip is also a woman. So that tells you that we are intentional. When you look at, bringing it down to local government level, we've got Nasipi Moya, Dr. Nasipi Moya, who's female, who's leading the caucus of the city of Tshwane. Then you go also to our former speaker in Johannesburg, Nobuhle Mthembu, who's also a woman, was in the forefront. So, it must come from the leadership that is intentional to say that women participation must not only be, where they're not on the head of the table making decisions. Our political leader is very, very intentional in that regard, and I think it's just typical male stereotypes that have dominated the political space that have not made a lot of leaders comfortable enough to put a woman in the forefront and say lead us. It takes a lot of intentionalities. You must be intentional to break the system, and I think that in terms of that, our party has done exceptionally well in placing us in places where we are able to not only be female leaders as a matter of tokenism, but really in places of influence and real, where we can make real decisions that rest on our shoulders. I can also give you another example now. In the ad hoc committee of Mkhwanazi, if you look at the of it. If you look at the makeup of it, a lot of political parties have placed senior male leaders at the helm or in the forefront in this committee. But we as ActionSA have placed Dereline James, who has been an activist in the space of law and order, and who has been on the policing portfolio, has been serving on it. We didn't take what naturally comes natural to a lot of political parties who would then be inclined to put the political leader or the caucus leader, which would have been Ethel Trollip. We went with the most person who's most well versed with the issues, but who's also female, because we feel that there must be some sort of gender representativity that must come in the forefront. When we saw the list of nominations, it was clear that we needed to be the party that then breaks the mold and places a female in the forefront.
Malebo, we can't not talk about Women's Month without discussing, of course, gender-based violence. And this pandemic, the scourge, continues to affect many of our women within this country. What do you feel needs to be done from a legislative perspective to make sure that we are eliminating this pandemic, not just combating it?
I think in terms of legislation, there isn't any piece of legislation that does not speak to us combating gender-based violence. We don't have the political will and enforcement and the necessary resources that are dedicated to ensuring that we are combating and preventing gender-based violence. I can tell you now that we've got a portfolio, and it also shows within how the budgets are allocated. That tells you where the priorities of this government lies. I can tell you we've got a portfolio committee of women, children, and people with disability. They've been given a mandate. They're constituting a complete and very capable portfolio committee, but they're not given funds. they have a zero budget to work from, and simply because their issues are not top of the agenda of the government of the day. I think what we lack is enforceability and the resources to ensure that whatever legislation that we have right now that underpins the issues of gender-based violence are carried out with the necessary resources. We don't even have centers within our SAPS police stations that are dedicated to gender-based violence victims. We don't. Even when we talk about cases in which SAPS must take when it comes to gender-based violence, we don't have people who are specifically trained for those issues. That tells me that in terms of enforceability, we are laxed and we have clumped it all with all types of crimes that we don't have a dedicated and special budget and political will for it to ensure that we are combating the scourge of gender-based violence actively.
Yeah, I think Malebo was speaking yesterday to Angel Kanyile. She's a part of the committee for women, children, and persons with disabilities. And one of the biggest challenges there is that this department, this ministry, is one of the least funded from National Treasury. And again, therein lies your problem. If we're not going to combat it from the top, then at the bottom, it's going to be practically the same results that we are seeing right now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, there's a wise scripture that always says, if you want to see a man and where his heart is, that's where his money is. Where your treasure goes, that's when we know that your agenda is based on that. And so if we don't see monies moving and budgets being allocated specifically to that, we know that this government is only paying lip service then to issues of gender-based violence and issues that affect particularly women, youth, and people with disabilities.
Malebo, we spoke about high female political representation. I mean, some of the countries that currently have it are Cuba, Sweden, if you're looking outside of the continent. But if you look at the east of our continent, of course, Rwanda has that. What can we as South Africa learn in terms of making sure that there is more political representation? I mean, we mentioned 46% within the National Assembly, but surely we want to see it come to that 50-50 balance, which I think all of us as South Africans would like to have.
So two ways. So I think the solutions need to be, we need to start incentivizing, whether it's at the level of the IEC in terms of party lists, we need to start saying, as IEC, we will incentivize political parties that have a 50% representation of women with such and such a thing. So whether it is more political funding that we give or allocate to parties that have a list that looks good in terms of gender representation, we also need to then say females, especially those who are new entrants into the political space, how do we then support them financially directly to their campaigns? This will also incentivize and ensure that women who have limited resources are able to say, the space looks good for me, why not take advantage of this opportunity? Furthermore, I think we need to have academies or civic education institutions that particularly target training women and preparing them for public office or political participation, especially if these women have just been activists. I think the training and really trying to get women into these spaces with the support that academies can give, I think that will go a long way in terms of preparing female candidates into entering the space.
Malebo, one final question. I've been asking this to all of the female representatives of the various political parties. How close or how far are we in terms of finally having a female president in our country?
Well, we're quite far.
Yeah.
We're not close yet. And I can tell you this because even now, with the positions in the executive, you can see that we still have a squabble amongst men. There is no political party, even in party conferences, where you will see a woman being propagated and put first place. It's still a squabble between males, testosterone, and their high egos, and women are generally put as support to the male candidates. So we're still a far way off, and I'm hoping that maybe, in a few years to come, in 15 years to come, we will be in a position to say that we are really close to finding a female leader who will represent South Africa. Yeah.
Well, hopefully we hope to see that day come soon. Malebo, absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us on News in Focus.
Thank you so much, Faraz. Thank you to your team.
That's Malebo Kobe, a Member of Parliament from ActionSA. Well, that's all we have for you here from News in Focus. Tomorrow, of course, we are returning with Talking Point. If you've missed today's episode, you'll be able to find our YouTube, you'll be able to find the interviews, I beg your pardon, on our YouTube channel, which is Hilaal TV. From myself, Faraz Patel, the rest of the team in Johannesburg, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.